In the depths of Naval Communication Center, Pearl Harbor, where satellite feeds hummed with encrypted chatter from across the Pacific, one woman's silence was about to become the loudest voice in military history. Mica Johnson had perfected the art of invisibility until the day her tormentors discovered that the quiet analyst they'd dismissed was the only person standing between the 7th Fleet and catastrophe. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you at 0600 hours on a humid Tuesday morning in September. Petty Officer First Class Mica Johnson adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses and settled into workstation Delta 7, the same isolated corner desk she'd occupied for the past 4 years at Naval Communication Center, Pearl Harbor. The morning ritual never varied. Black coffee in a ceramic mug emblazoned with faded anchor insignia, a single glazed donut from the vending machine, and 17 minutes of absolute silence before the chaos of intercepted signals began flooding. Her monitors. Mica was 31 years old, unremarkable in every way that mattered to the Navy's social hierarchy. Her uniform was regulation perfect, but somehow managed to look borrowed. Her auburn hair, streaked with premature silver from countless late nights hunched over encryption algorithms, was pulled back in a functional bun that had never seen the inside of a salon. She moved through the communication center like a ghost present but unnoticed, essential but unremarked upon. The Naval Communication Center occupied 3 levels beneath Pearl Harbor's administrative complex, a labyrinth of reinforced concrete and humming electronics where the Pacific Fleet's digital nervous system pulsed 24 hours a day. Rows of workstations stretched across the main floor, each manned by signals intelligence specialists monitoring everything from routine weather reports to encrypted diplomatic chatter. The air conditioning ran constantly, fighting a losing battle against the heat generated by servers that processed terabytes of intercepted communications daily. Mica's workstation sat in the far corner, deliberately positioned away from the main traffic flow. Her supervisor, Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez, had placed her there 3 years ago after what he diplomatically termed interpersonal challenges with her colleagues. The isolation suited Mica perfectly. While other analysts worked in teams, sharing insights and competing for recognition, she preferred the solitude that allowed her mind to focus on patterns others missed. Her specialty was signal analysis, the painstaking process of identifying, categorizing, and prioritizing the thousands of radio transmissions intercepted daily across the Pacific. Most analysts relied on automated systems to flag potentially significant communications, but Mica possessed an almost supernatural ability to detect anomalies in raw signal data. She could spot encrypted military transmissions disguised as commercial shipping chatter, identify new communication protocols before the computer systems recognized them, and trace the geographic origins of signals with accuracy that consistently amazed her superiors. The irony wasn't lost on her that someone so gifted at decoding communication spent most of her time in self-imposed silence. The morning's first intercept batch arrived at 0623 hours, a routine dump of overnight traffic from listening posts scattered across the Pacific. Most of it was predictable: merchant vessel position reports, weather data, and the endless stream of administrative chatter that kept the world's navies functioning. Mica's trained eye scanned the frequency analysis charts, looking for the subtle variations that might indicate something more significant. Her colleagues began arriving around 0700, bringing with them the daily soundtrack of forced camaraderie and professional rivalry that defined military life in peacetime. Petty Officer Second Class Derek Hammond was typically the loudest, his booming voice carrying across the center as he regaled anyone within earshot with weekend adventures that grew more heroic with each retelling. Today's story involved a bar fight in Honolulu where he'd supposedly defended the honor of the entire Navy against a group of Army Rangers. "You should have seen me," Rodriguez, Hammond declared, dropping into his workstation 3 rows ahead of Mica. 5 Rangers, 1 sailor. They didn't know what hit them. Chief Rodriguez emerged from his office with the expression of a man who'd heard this story evolve over the past week. Hammond, the only thing you fought this weekend was the urge to order another beer. Now focus on your intercepts. Petty Officer. Third-class Jennifer Walsh, Hammond's usual audience, giggled appropriately before settling at her own station. Walsh had joined the communications center 6 months ago, fresh from technical school and eager to prove herself. She possessed adequate technical skills, but compensated for her inexperience with enthusiasm that often manifested as gossip and social maneuvering. The dynamic between the 3 of them, Hammond, Walsh, and their informal circle of followers, dominated the center's social atmosphere. They were loud, confident, and collectively dismissive of anyone who didn't share their extroverted approach to military life. Mica had become their favorite target, though their mockery was subtle enough to avoid official notice. "Hey, Silent." "Mica," Walsh called out, her voice carrying the false sweetness that preceded most of her verbal jabs. "Did you have a wild weekend? Let me guess, stayed home with your computer." Mica didn't respond, her attention focused on a frequency anomaly in the overnight intercepts. A series of brief transmissions had occurred at regular intervals, each lasting exactly 47 seconds and originating from somewhere northwest of the Marshall Islands. The signals weren't encrypted using any known military protocols, but something about their timing and structure suggested deliberate purpose. "She probably spent the weekend talking to her imaginary friends," Hammond added, earning snickers from his audience. "Right, Mica? Having deep conversations with your radio waves." The mockery had evolved over 4 years from outright hostility to casual cruelty. When Mica had first arrived at the communications center, her exceptional test scores and technical recommendations had threatened Hammond's position as the unit's recognized expert. His solution had been to systematically undermine her confidence. Through social isolation and public humiliation, the campaign had been devastatingly effective. Mica had learned that responding to their taunts only provided more ammunition. Silence was her shield, but it also fed their perception of her as weak and antisocial. They interpreted her focus on work as obsession, her preference for solitude as inability to connect with others, and her reluctance to engage in their verbal sparring as evidence of inferiority. What they didn't understand was that Mica's silence masked a mind that processed information differently than theirs. While they chatted about weekend exploits, she was mentally cataloging the subtle variations in signal patterns that might indicate enemy activity. While they competed for attention and recognition, she was developing new analytical techniques that consistently produced results their automated systems missed at 0847 hours. Mica isolated the anomalous signals for detailed analysis. The transmissions were short-burst communications, technically sophisticated, but using frequency patterns that didn't match any known naval protocols. More intriguingly, the signals were occurring at precise intervals that suggested coordination between multiple sources. She pulled up a geographic plotting program and began triangulating the transmission origins. The data points formed a rough arc extending from the Marshall Islands northwest toward the Philippines, exactly along the shipping lanes used by commercial vessels, but also within the patrol areas assigned to the 7th Fleet's destroyer squadron. Currently conducting exercises in the region. A chill ran down Mica's spine as the implications became clear. These weren't random signals or equipment malfunctions. Someone was conducting coordinated surveillance of U.S. naval operations, using communication protocols sophisticated enough to avoid detection by standard monitoring systems. She glanced around the communications center, wondering if she should immediately report her findings. Chief Rodriguez was in his office, door closed, participating in the morning briefing call with Fleet Headquarters. Hammond and Walsh were engaged in animated discussion about their plans for the upcoming weekend. Completely oblivious to the potential crisis unfolding in the data streams around them, Mica turned back to her analysis, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she dove deeper into the signal characteristics. The transmissions were using a frequency hopping technique that changed broadcast wavelengths in seemingly random patterns, but her trained eye detected the underlying algorithm. Someone had developed a new encryption system specifically designed to evade U.S. signal intelligence capabilities. As she worked, the mockery from her colleagues continued as background noise. Hammond was regaling the center with another exaggerated story, this one about his superior technical skills and how he'd single-handedly solved a communication crisis during a recent training exercise. The story was fiction. Mica had been present during the actual incident and knew that Hammond had been completely baffled by the technical challenges involved. "That's why they keep me around," Hammond concluded his tale. "When the real technical problems arise, they need someone who can think outside the box, not some antisocial hermit who hides in the corner talking to computers." The casual cruelty of the comment stung, but Mica forced herself to focus on the data. She was close to something significant, and her personal feelings would have to wait. The signal analysis was revealing a pattern more complex and troubling than she'd initially suspected. The anomalous transmissions weren't just surveillance, they were coordination signals for what appeared to be a sophisticated intelligence operation targeting the 7th Fleet's current position and planned movements. Someone with access to advanced communication technology was tracking the fleet's exercises in real time. As the morning progressed and the evidence mounted, Mica realized she was looking at the early stages of what could be a major security breach. The quiet analyst who'd been dismissed and mocked for 4 years had stumbled upon intelligence that could determine the fate of thousands of sailors. She just had to find the courage to speak up before it was too late. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. At 10:32 hours, Mica's analysis reached a breakthrough that made her blood run cold. The coordinated signals she'd been tracking weren't just surveillance. They were actively intercepting and decoding the U.S. naval communications in real time. Someone had developed a sophisticated man-in-the-middle attack against the 7th Fleet's secure communication network. The revelation came through a technique Mica had developed herself during off-duty hours, a cross-correlation algorithm that could detect subtle timing discrepancies in signal transmission. When she applied it to the morning's intercepts, the results showed that several routine fleet communications had been delayed by microseconds, evidence that the signals were being captured, processed, and retransmitted by an intermediary system. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled up the fleet's current operational status. The destroyer squadron USS Porter, USS McCain, and USS Fitzgerald were conducting anti-submarine warfare exercises approximately 180 nautical miles northeast of Guam. The exercise parameters were classified, but the ship's general positions were being transmitted via standard communication protocols that the enemy intercept system was clearly monitoring. Mica glanced toward Chief Rodriguez's office, where the morning briefing call was still in progress. The standard protocol would be to report her findings immediately, but years of being dismissed and ridiculed had eroded her confidence in her own judgment. What if she was wrong? What if the patterns she was seeing were just coincidental anomalies in the data? The doubt was paralyzing, fed by 4 years of colleagues treating her insights as the obsessive fantasies of an antisocial analyst who spent too much time staring at computer screens. Hammond had once publicly suggested that Mica saw patterns that didn't exist because she had no real-world experience to provide context. The comment had stung because it contained just enough truth to be devastating. She was indeed isolated, both professionally and personally. At 10:47 hours, a new batch of intercepts arrived from the overnight collection. Mica's automated sorting algorithm immediately flagged 17 signals that matched the anomalous pattern she'd been tracking. The enemy operation was expanding, adding new intercept points and increasing the frequency of surveillance transmissions. She pulled up a secure chat window to send a preliminary alert to Chief Rodriguez, then hesitated. The cursor blinked in the empty message field as she struggled to find words that would convey the urgency of her discovery without sounding like the paranoid ramblings of an isolated analyst who'd been staring at data too long. "Rodriguez is going to think you finally snapped," she whispered to herself, echoing the kind of dismissive comment she'd overheard countless times over the years. Behind her, Hammond's voice carried across the communication center as he briefed a junior analyst on proper signal evaluation techniques. His tone was condescending, the voice of someone who'd appointed himself the center's unofficial technical authority, despite possessing a fraction of Mica's analytical capabilities. "The key is not to get lost in the weeds," Hammond was saying. "Some people here spend so much time obsessing over minor anomalies that they lose sight of the big picture. You've got to have real operational experience to understand what matters and what's just noise." The comment was clearly directed at Mica, another subtle dig at her tendency to identify patterns that others missed. The irony was bitter. She was literally looking at intelligence that could affect the safety of 3,000 sailors. While Hammond dispensed advice about avoiding false positives, Mica minimized the chat window and returned to her analysis, diving deeper into the technical characteristics of the enemy signals. The encryption system being used was unlike anything in her database of known foreign military communication protocols. It employed a hybrid approach that combined traditional frequency hopping with what appeared to be quantum-resistant encryption algorithms technology that suggested a highly sophisticated adversary. At 11:03 hours, her workstation received a priority message from the Pacific Fleet Intelligence Center, requesting immediate analysis of unusual signal activity in the Marshall Islands region. Mica's pulse quickened as she realized that other analysts had begun detecting fragments of the same operation she'd been tracking. The message contained partial intercepts from 3 different listening posts, each capturing pieces of the coordinated surveillance network. Individually, the fragments appeared to be routine commercial communications or equipment testing. But when Mica applied her correlation algorithm to the combined dataset, the full scope of the operation became terrifyingly clear. The enemy had deployed at least 12 intercept platforms across a 1,000-square-mile area, creating a comprehensive surveillance net that was monitoring all U.S. naval communications in the region. More disturbing, the system was learning, adapting its intercept techniques in response to routine changes in fleet communication protocols that she cross-referenced the intercept locations with current shipping traffic and identified the likely platforms, a group of commercial fishing vessels that had maintained unusually regular positions over the past week. The ships were flying Panamanian flags, but their movement patterns suggested military-level coordination and discipline. Mica's breath caught as she realized the implications. If the enemy could monitor fleet communications in real time, they could predict the exact timing and location of naval exercises, supply runs, and operational movements. Any hostile force with access to that intelligence could position submarines, surface vessels, or aircraft to achieve devastating tactical advantage. The analysis was compelling, the evidence overwhelming, but doubt continued to gnaw at her. Years of social isolation had convinced her that her perspective was fundamentally flawed, that her tendency to see complex patterns where others saw routine data was a professional liability rather than an asset. At 11:27 hours, Chief Rodriguez's office door opened and he emerged looking frustrated from his morning briefing. Mica watched him scan the communications center, his gaze lingering on her workstation before moving on to Hammond's section where animated conversation suggested productive teamwork. She knew this was her moment. Chief Rodriguez was between meetings, the intelligence was time-critical, and her analysis was as complete as it could be without additional resources. But the years of ridicule had taken their toll. Instead of standing up and calling out to him, she remained frozen at her workstation, cursor still blinking in the empty chat window. Hammond chose that moment to approach Rodriguez with his own morning briefing, a routine report on overnight intercept volumes and processing statistics. Their conversation was loud enough for most of the center to overhear, Hammond's confident baritone contrasting sharply with Rodriguez's more measured responses. "Everything looks normal on the overnight batch, Chief," Hammond reported with the casual authority of someone accustomed to being taken seriously. "Standard commercial traffic, some routine military chatter, nothing that triggered our automated alerts. Just the usual Pacific noise." Rodriguez nodded absently, his mind clearly occupied with whatever crisis had dominated his morning briefing call. "Good. Keep monitoring for any changes in pattern or volume. Intelligence is concerned about increased submarine activity in the region." Mica's hands clenched involuntarily. Hammond's routine assessment had completely missed the sophisticated intelligence operation she'd uncovered. Dismissed as Pacific noise, the very signals that could compromise fleet security. His confident incompetence was about to become a liability that could cost lives. "Actually, Chief," Hammond continued, lowering his voice conspiratorially, "you might want to keep an eye on Johnson's analysis reports. She's been flagging a lot of signals as anomalous lately, but when I reviewed her work, most of it looked like standard commercial traffic to me. I think she might be overthinking things again." The casual betrayal hit Mica like a physical blow. Hammond had been reviewing her work without authorization, dismissing her findings based on his inferior analytical skills, and now actively undermining her credibility with their supervisor. The systematic campaign to isolate and discredit her was continuing, even as she sat on intelligence that could save the fleet. Rodriguez glanced toward Mica's workstation, his expression unreadable. She caught his eye for a brief moment and saw something that might have been concern, but before she could interpret it fully, Hammond recaptured his attention with another anecdote about his superior understanding of signal analysis protocols. At 1,142 hours, a new priority alert arrived from Pacific Fleet Command. Enemy submarine activity had been detected approximately 50 miles northwest of the destroyer squadron's exercise area. The submarine's positions correlated perfectly with the intercept network Mica had mapped, but she realized with growing horror that the fleet was walking into a trap without knowing their communications were compromised. The enemy wasn't just monitoring the fleet, they were positioning assets based on real-time intelligence about planned movements and exercise parameters. The destroyer squadron was conducting anti-submarine warfare training against simulated threats while actual enemy submarines used their compromised communications to achieve tactical positioning. Mica's analysis showed that the exercise schedule and search patterns were being transmitted via the same communication protocols the enemy was intercepting. The destroyers were essentially broadcasting their intentions to hostile forces that could use that intelligence to avoid detection or, worse, to coordinate an attack. She stared at her screen, watching red dots representing probable enemy positions converge on blue symbols marking U.S. naval assets. The quiet analyst who'd been mocked for seeing patterns others missed was looking at evidence of an intelligence compromise that could determine the outcome of any potential engagement. The weight of the discovery was crushing. 3,000 sailors were operating under the assumption that their communications were secure, while enemy forces used those same communications to track their every movement. The professional ridicule she'd endured for 4 years suddenly seemed trivial compared to the responsibility of protecting lives, but years of systematic undermining had left her paralyzed by self-doubt. Was she really seeing evidence of a sophisticated enemy operation? Or was Hammond right that she was overthinking routine signals and creating patterns that didn't exist? As the morning progressed toward noon, Mica realized that her silence was becoming a choice with potentially catastrophic consequences. The quiet nature that had made her a target for mockery was about to become the factor that determined whether she found the courage to speak up before it was too late. At 12:03 hours, Mica made a decision that would change everything. She saved her analysis to a secure drive, gathered her printed signal correlation charts, and walked across the communication center toward Chief Rodriguez's office. Her legs felt unsteady, but the weight of 3,000 lives and potential danger finally outweighed her fear of professional humiliation. Rodriguez was reviewing morning reports when she knocked on his doorframe. He looked up with mild surprise. Mica rarely initiated direct communication, preferring to submit her findings through digital channels that allowed her to avoid face-to-face interaction. "Chief, I need to report potential compromise of fleet communications," she said quietly, her voice barely audible above the center's ambient noise. Rodriguez gestured toward the chair across from his desk, but before Mica could sit down, Hammond's voice boomed across the center. "Chief, we've got a problem with the automated sorting algorithm. It's flagging commercial shipping traffic as military intercepts." The interruption was perfectly timed, as if Hammond had been monitoring her movements. Rodriguez held up a finger to Mica, indicating she should wait, then called out, "What kind of problem, Hammond?" Hammond approached the office with his characteristic swagger, carrying a tablet displaying signal analysis charts. He positioned himself in the doorway, effectively blocking Mica's access to Rodriguez while commanding the chief's attention. "Overnight processing batch is showing anomalies in the commercial shipping band," Hammond explained, his tone suggesting technical expertise and urgent concern. "Multiple signals are being classified as potential military communications, but when I manually reviewed them, they're clearly just routine merchant vessel chatter. The algorithm might be corrupted." Mica's stomach clenched as she realized Hammond was describing her discoveries and dismissing them as system errors. The sophisticated enemy intercept network she'd painstakingly identified was being characterized as a computer malfunctioned by someone who lacked the analytical skills to recognize the operation's complexity. "Show me the data," Rodriguez said, taking Hammond's tablet. Hammond leaned over the desk, pointing to frequency charts that represented hours of Mica's careful analysis. "See these signals here? The system flagged them as coordinated military communications, but they're obviously just commercial traffic using standard maritime protocols. Someone needs to recalibrate the sorting parameters before we waste time chasing false positives." Standing behind Hammond, Mica watched her critical intelligence being systematically discredited. She clutched her own analysis charts, knowing they contained evidence that would expose Hammond's incompetence, but years of conditioning made it nearly impossible to interrupt his confident presentation. Rodriguez studied the charts with growing concern. The signals Hammond was dismissing did appear anomalous, and the pattern recognition system rarely generated false positives on this scale. "Johnson," he said, looking past Hammond toward Mica, "you're our best pattern analyst. What's your assessment of these intercepts?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Mica felt the weight of Hammond's expectant gaze, knowing he'd positioned himself as the voice of rational analysis while casting her as the obsessive analyst who saw threats where none existed. This was her moment to present 4 hours of painstaking research that could save the fleet, but Hammond's presence made it feel like a trap. "I believe the signals represent a coordinated intelligence operation," she said carefully, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "The patterns suggest enemy forces are intercepting and analyzing fleet communications in real time." Hammond's laugh was dismissive and cruel. "Chief, this is exactly what I was talking about earlier. Johnson sees conspiracy theories in routine commercial traffic. These are fishing vessels using standard maritime communication protocols, not some sophisticated enemy operation." "Actually," Mica said, surprised by the firmness in her own voice. "If you examine the signal timing correlation and frequency hopping patterns, you'll see evidence of military-grade coordination that's inconsistent with commercial phishing operations." She stepped forward and placed her charts on Rodriguez's desk, pointing to the correlation analysis that Hammond had either missed or deliberately ignored. The data showed precise timing relationships between supposedly independent signals, frequency patterns that matched known military communication protocols, and geographic positioning that created comprehensive surveillance coverage of fleet operations. Hammond leaned over her shoulder, studying the charts with theatrical skepticism. These timing correlations could be explained by atmospheric interference or equipment synchronization. "You're assuming malicious intent where simpler explanations exist. The probability of random correlation across 12 independent platforms is mathematically negligible," Mica replied, her analytical training overriding her social anxiety. "The frequency hopping sequence follows a deterministic algorithm that's inconsistent with commercial communication protocols." Rodriguez examined the competing analyses, his expression growing more serious as he absorbed the technical details. The conversation had attracted attention from other analysts, including Petty Officer Walsh, who positioned herself near the office door with obvious interest in the developing conflict. "Furthermore," Mica continued, her confidence building as she discussed technical specifics, "cross-referencing the signal locations with current shipping manifests shows these vessels have maintained stationary positions for extended periods, which is inconsistent with phishing operations, but consistent with intelligence collection." Hammond's face flushed as Mica's detailed analysis exposed the superficial nature of his own assessment. "Chief, Johnson spends so much time in isolation that she's lost perspective on normal operational patterns. These kinds of elaborate theories are what happen when someone overthinks routine data. The personal attack was designed to shift focus from technical accuracy to professional credibility, leveraging years of social conditioning that had positioned Mica as an unreliable outsider. But Rodriguez was studying her correlation charts with the expression of someone who understood the implications of what he was seeing. "The timing analysis is compelling," Rodriguez said slowly. "If these signals are coordinated, it represents a significant intelligence threat." Walsh stepped into the office, her voice carrying false concern. "Chief, Hammond has a point about Johnson's tendency to see patterns that aren't really there. Remember last month when she flagged those commercial radio transmissions as potential submarine communications? They turned out to be weather data." Mica's face burned with embarrassment as the incident was distorted beyond recognition. The signals in question had indeed been weather data, but her analysis had correctly identified them as unusual transmissions that warranted investigation. The fact that they'd proven benign didn't invalidate her analytical methods, but Walsh's characterization made it sound like paranoid delusion. "That analysis was methodologically sound," Mica said quietly. "Unusual signals should be investigated regardless of their ultimate source." Hammond seized the opening. "Methodologically sound, but practically worthless. We can't afford to chase every anomaly that catches Johnson's attention, especially when real threats might be overlooked while we're investigating her latest conspiracy theory." The systematic undermining was devastating in its effectiveness. Years of similar exchanges had conditioned everyone in the communication center to view Mica's insights with skepticism, creating a professional environment where her most important discovery would be dismissed as the obsessive fantasy of an isolated analyst. Rodriguez looked between the competing analyses, weighing technical evidence against professional reputation. Mica watched his expression and realized with growing horror that Hammond's campaign of character assassination was succeeding, even in the face of compelling intelligence. "Chief," she said desperately, "the destroyer squadron is conducting exercises in the exact area where these intercept platforms are positioned. If enemy forces are monitoring our communications, the ships could be walking into a trap. Or Hammond countered smoothly. We could be about to scramble the entire Pacific Fleet based on Johnson's misinterpretation of routine commercial traffic. The cost of false alarms includes both resources and credibility. The argument was sophisticated. In its manipulation, framing Mica's warning as a choice between reasonable caution and reckless overreaction. Hammond's confident delivery and established credibility made him appear to be the voice of professional judgment, while her urgent warning sounded like the desperate pleas of someone whose competence was questionable. Walsh nodded in agreement. With Hammond's assessment, Johnson's always been intense about her analysis work. Sometimes that intensity creates problems where none exist. Rodriguez studied the technical data one more time, but Mica could see doubt creeping into his expression. The social dynamics of the communications center were overwhelming the technical evidence. Years of conditioning triumphing over mathematical proof. At 12:31 hours, a priority alert arrived from Pacific Fleet Intelligence requesting immediate analysis of suspicious signal activity in the Marshall Islands region. The message contained partial intercepts that matched exactly the patterns Mica had been tracking for 4 hours. She pointed to the alert with trembling hands. "Chief, this confirms everything I've been trying to tell you. Fleet Intelligence has detected the same operation I've been analyzing." Hammond quickly scanned the message, his confidence faltering as he realized the implications. But his recovery was swift and calculating. This just proves that multiple analysts are seeing the same atmospheric anomalies and equipment interference. Mass hysteria doesn't make false positives more credible. The deflection was masterful, acknowledging the corroborating evidence while maintaining that widespread detection somehow supported his dismissive interpretation rather than validating Mica's analysis. Rodriguez's secure phone rang, displaying a call from Pacific Fleet Command. As he answered, Mica realized that her window of opportunity was closing. The evidence was overwhelming, the threat was immediate, but years of social conditioning had created an environment where her most critical insights would be dismissed by the very people who needed to hear them. The confrontation that should have been her moment of vindication was becoming another episode in Hammond's systematic campaign to undermine her credibility. As Rodriguez took the call from Fleet Command, she understood that her ability to protect 3,000 sailors was being determined not by the accuracy of her analysis, but by the effectiveness of workplace bullying that had isolated her for 4 years. The quiet analyst who saw patterns others missed was about to discover whether technical excellence could overcome professional sabotage when lives hung in the balance. Chief Rodriguez answered the secure line with crisp military precision. Communications Center, Pearl Harbor, Chief Rodriguez speaking. As he listened to the voice on the other end, his expression shifted from routine attention to sharp concern, then to something approaching alarm. Mica watched his face change, recognizing the signs of a developing crisis. Hammond, meanwhile, continued his confident dismissal of her analysis, unaware that events were rapidly overtaking his comfortable certainties. "Yes, sir," Rodriguez said into the phone. "We've been monitoring unusual signal activity in that region. Yes, sir, we have preliminary analysis suggesting coordinated surveillance." His eyes found Mica's across the office. "I'll need to review our current assessment and get back to you within the hour." He ended the call and immediately reached for his secure computer terminal, accessing classified communication channels. That required his personal authorization codes. The casual atmosphere of the morning shift evaporated as other personnel sensed the shift in command attention. "That was Captain Morrison from Pacific Fleet Intelligence," Rodriguez announced, his voice carrying new urgency. "Submarine sonar contacts have been confirmed in Grid 77, approximately 60 miles northwest of our destroyer squadron's exercise area. The contacts are maintaining positions that suggest coordinated positioning rather than random patrol patterns." Hammond's confident demeanor flickered for the first time that morning. Mica felt her pulse quicken as she realized that external events were validating her analysis in real time. The enemy operation she detected through signal analysis was being confirmed through multiple intelligence channels. Rodriguez continued. More concerning, the submarine positions correlate with unusual communication intercepts detected by multiple listening posts across the Pacific. Fleet intelligence suspects our exercise communications may be compromised. A heavy silence settled over the communication center as the implications became clear. If enemy forces were monitoring fleet communications, the destroyer squadron's anti-submarine warfare exercises were not just training. They were potentially becoming tactical intelligence for hostile submarines, positioned to exploit that knowledge. Stepped forward, her correlation chart still spread across Rodriguez's desk. Chief, the signal analysis I've been trying to present shows exactly how that compromise is occurring. The enemy has deployed a sophisticated intercept network using commercial vessels as platforms. Hammond, recovering from his momentary uncertainty, interjected quickly, Chief, we still don't have definitive proof that these fishing vessels are anything more than commercial traffic. Submarine contacts don't automatically validate Johnson's theoretical analysis. But Rodriguez was studying Mica's charts with new intensity, cross-referencing her data with the information he'd just received from Fleet Command. The correlation was undeniable. Her signal intercept locations matched almost perfectly with the submarine contact positions reported by Fleet sonar. Johnson, walk me through your analysis step by step, Rodriguez commanded. I need to understand exactly what you've discovered and how confident you are in your conclusions. For the first time in 4 years, Mica had Rodriguez's complete attention and professional respect. Hammond and Walsh watched with obvious discomfort as she began presenting the technical details they dismissed as paranoid overanalysis. The Z initial intercepts showed frequency hopping patterns consistent with military-grade communication systems. Mica began, pointing to her spectral analysis charts. The timing correlations across multiple platforms indicate centralized coordination, which is inconsistent with independent commercial operations. She moved to her geographic plotting display, showing how the intercept locations formed a comprehensive surveillance network. The platform positions create overlapping coverage zones that would allow real-time monitoring of all fleet communications. In the exercise area, more significantly, the network is adaptive. It's been adjusting its coverage patterns in response to changes in fleet positioning. Rodriguez absorbed the technical details with growing appreciation for their implications. How long has this operation been active? Based on historical signal data, approximately 10 days, Mica replied. The network has been gradually expanding its coverage and refining its intercept capabilities. Yesterday's exercise communications would have provided detailed intelligence about today's planned operations. Hammond shifted uncomfortably as the conversation moved into technical territory where his limitations became apparent. Chief, even if Johnson's right about coordinated communications, we're still making assumptions about hostile intent. These could be legitimate research vessels or international observers monitoring routine exercises. Research vessels don't deploy quantum-resistant encryption systems, Mica countered, surprising herself with the sharpness of her response. The signal processing capabilities I've detected exceed most military communication systems. This isn't casual observation, it's sophisticated intelligence collection. At 12:47 hours, a new priority alert arrived simultaneously on multiple workstations throughout the communications center. The automated threat assessment system had upgraded the Marshall Islands region to elevated surveillance status, triggering enhanced monitoring protocols across the Pacific Fleet's intelligence network. Rodriguez read the alert with mounting concern. Fleet sonar has confirmed 6 submarine contacts maintaining coordinated positions. The pattern suggests pre-positioned assets rather than routine patrol activity. Petty Officer Davis, monitoring the main communication feeds, called out from his workstation. "Chief, we're receiving multiple requests for communication protocol verification from the destroyer squadron. They're reporting intermittent signal delays and possible transmission interference." Mica's blood ran cold as she realized the full scope of what was happening. The enemy intercept network wasn't just monitoring fleet communications, it was actively interfering with them, creating delays and distortions that could compromise coordination between ships during critical operations. "The signal delays are consistent with man-in-the-middle attacks," she explained to Rodriguez. "The enemy system is intercepting our communications, processing them for intelligence value, then retransmitting them with slight delays that appear to be routine transmission problems." Hammond's face had gone pale as the technical evidence overwhelmed his ability to provide alternative explanations. "Chief, if Johnson's analysis is correct, then our entire communication security for the exercise has been compromised from the beginning." Rodriguez was already reaching for his secure phone to contact Fleet Command when another alert arrived. This one marked flash priority, the highest level of urgency in military communications. The message was brief but devastating. "Submarine. Contact Alpha 7 has achieved firing solution on USS Porter. Request immediate communication protocol change and exercise termination." The communication center erupted in controlled chaos as personnel rushed to implement emergency protocols. Mica watched the crisis unfold with a mixture of vindication and horror. Her analysis had been correct, but the validation was coming at the potential cost of American lives. "All stations, implement MCON Alpha protocols immediately," Rodriguez commanded, referring to emission control procedures that would minimize electronic signatures. "Cut all non-essential communications and prepare for emergency frequency changes." But Mica realized with growing alarm that standard countermeasures might not be sufficient against the sophisticated system she'd detected. "Chief, the enemy network has been analyzing our communication protocols for 10 days. They'll be able to adapt to routine frequency changes and encryption modifications." Rodriguez paused in his emergency coordination, understanding the implications. If the enemy system had learned the fleet's communication patterns and procedures, conventional security measures might provide only temporary protection. "What do you recommend?" he asked Mica directly, the first time in 4 years that her technical judgment had been solicited during the crisis. Hammond started to interject, but Rodriguez cut him off with a sharp gesture. This was no longer a theoretical debate about signal analysis. It was a tactical situation where technical expertise could determine the outcome of a potential engagement. Mica's mind raced through the possibilities, analyzing the enemy systems, capabilities and vulnerabilities based on her 10 hours of detailed study. The network was sophisticated and adaptive, but it had one critical limitation. It required time to analyze and decode new communication protocols. "We need to implement a completely novel communication system," she said, her voice gaining confidence as she outlined her strategy. "Something the enemy hasn't seen before and can't quickly adapt to analyze." She moved to a secure workstation and began pulling up archived communication protocols from decades-old systems that predated modern digital encryption. "If we revert to modified analog systems with custom encryption keys, the enemy network won't have reference patterns to analyze. It would take hours or days to decode new analog protocols instead of minutes for digital systems they've been studying." Rodriguez grasped the elegance of the solution immediately. "You're suggesting we fight advanced technology with obsolete technology they haven't prepared for?" "Exactly," Mica confirmed. "The enemy system is optimized for intercepting and analyzing modern digital communications. Analog systems with custom modifications would force them to start their analysis process from scratch." Hammond, desperate to maintain some relevance in the crisis, spoke up. "Chief, that's an extremely risky strategy." Analog systems are inherently less secure and more vulnerable to basic interception. But they're also less predictable to automated analysis systems, Mica replied firmly. Security through obscurity isn't ideal, but it's better than using systems the enemy has been studying for 10 days. Rodriguez made his decision with the decisive authority of a senior petty officer facing a tactical crisis. Johnson, I'm authorizing you to design and implement emergency communication protocols for the destroyer squadron. You have 30 minutes to develop a system that can protect our ships while they execute emergency maneuvers. As Mica moved to her workstation to begin developing the emergency protocols, she felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. The quiet analyst who'd been mocked for her obsessive attention to technical details was now tasked with creating the communication system that could save 3 ships and 3,000 lives. Behind her, Hammond stood in stunned silence. Finally, understanding that his years of undermining Mica's credibility had nearly prevented the discovery that could determine the outcome of the crisis. The confident analyst who dismissed her warnings as paranoid overanalysis was watching her become the center's most critical asset in a matter of minutes. The crisis was far from over, but for the first time in 4 years, Mica Johnson's technical expertise was being recognized for what it truly was: the difference between life and death in the dangerous game of naval intelligence warfare. At 12:52 hours, Mica's fingers flew across her keyboard as she accessed archived communication protocols from the 1980s systems that predated digital encryption and relied on analog frequency modulation techniques that modern intercept systems weren't designed to analyze. The irony wasn't lost on her that cutting-edge enemy technology might be defeated by deliberately obsolete American systems. Around her, the communication center had transformed into a crisis coordination hub. Rodriguez was simultaneously managing communication with Fleet Command, coordinating with Pacific Fleet Intelligence, and overseeing the implementation of emergency protocols. The casual atmosphere of the morning shift had been replaced by the focused intensity of military personnel facing a genuine threat. Mica pulled up the technical specifications for the NWSC-3 satellite communication system, a Cold War-era analog platform that had been phased out of active service but remained in the fleet's emergency backup inventory. The system used frequency shift keying with custom modulation patterns that could be rapidly reconfigured without the standardized digital signatures that modern intercept systems relied upon for automated analysis. "Chief," she called out, not looking away from her screen, "I need authorization to access the emergency backup communication protocols and modify them for current tactical requirements." Rodriguez appeared beside her workstation, studying the technical diagram she was displaying. "How long will implementation take?" 23 minutes to develop the modified protocols, Mica replied with the precision that came from years of technical analysis. Another 15 minutes for the destroyer squadron to implement the changes, assuming they still have functional NWSC-3 equipment aboard. "They do," Rodriguez confirmed. "All Arleigh Burke-class destroyers maintain backup analog systems for exactly this type of scenario." Asterisk behind them, Hammond attempted to insert himself into the technical discussion. "Chief, analog systems have significant limitations in terms of data transmission rates and signal clarity. We might be creating communication problems while trying to solve security issues." Mica responded without turning around, her attention focused on the complex modifications required to adapt 40-year-old technology for modern tactical requirements. Data transmission rates are irrelevant if the enemy is intercepting and analyzing every digital communication. Clarity is irrelevant if hostile submarines are using our own communications to achieve firing solutions on our ships. The blunt assessment silenced Hammond's objections. For the first time in 4 years, technical reality was overwhelming social manipulation, and Mica's expertise was being recognized as more valuable than workplace politics. At 13:01 hours, a new crisis alert arrived from the USS Porter. Sonar contact Alpha 7 is close to within torpedo range. Request immediate tactical communication guidance for coordinated evasive maneuvers. Rodriguez's jaw tightened as he realized the time pressure they were facing. The destroyer squadron needed secure communications to coordinate their response to submarine threats. But their current digital systems were compromised by the very enemy forces they were trying to evade. Johnson, what's your status on the emergency? Protocols? 12 minutes to completion, Mica replied, her voice steady despite the pressure. I'm integrating burst transmission capabilities with the analog base system to maximize information density, while maintaining security through obscurity. She was working in a state of focused concentration that had become familiar over years of complex technical challenges, but never before had the stakes been measured in human lives, rather than analytical accuracy. The communication system she was designing needed to be sophisticated, enough to coordinate 3-ship tactical maneuvers, while remaining simple enough to implement under combat conditions. Petty Officer Davis, monitoring fleet communications. Provided regular updates on the developing tactical situation. USS McCain reports sonar contact. Bravo 4 attempting to achieve flanking position. USS Fitzgerald has identified possible torpedo tube flooding on contact Charlie 2. Each update reinforced the urgency of Mica's work. The enemy submarines weren't just monitoring the exercise. They were actively maneuvering to exploit the intelligence they'd gathered from 10 days of intercepted communications. Hammond, increasingly marginalized as events proved his dismissive analysis catastrophically wrong, made one final attempt to assert relevance. Chief, we should consider requesting additional intelligence support from Pacific Fleet, rather than relying on improvised communication systems developed under crisis conditions. Rodriguez's response was sharp and definitive. Hammond, Pacific Fleet Intelligence specifically requested our assessment of the communication compromise. Johnson's analysis identified the threat, and her solution is our best option for protecting the destroyer squadron until broader countermeasures can be implemented. The rebuke was public and unmistakable. After 4 years of systematic undermining, Hammond's campaign to discredit Mica had finally collapsed under the weight of actual crisis. His confident dismissals and social manipulation tactics were useless. When lives depended on technical competence rather than workplace politics, Mica continued her work, adapting analog frequency patterns for digital encryption, keys that could be rapidly changed if the enemy began to adapt their analysis. The system she was creating combined the unpredictability of obsolete technology with the flexibility of modern cryptographic techniques, a hybrid approach that should provide temporary security while fleet-wide countermeasures were developed. At 13:09 hours, she completed the core protocol design and began preparing implementation instructions for transmission to the destroyer squadron. The system required manual configuration of analog transmission equipment, followed by integration with digital navigation and tactical systems. A complex procedure that would normally require extensive testing and crew training. Chief, emergency protocols are ready for transmission, Mica announced. Implementation will require approximately 15 minutes per ship, during which they'll be operating with minimal communication capabilities. Rodriguez studied the technical specifications, understanding the risk inherent in her solution. The destroyer squadron would need to temporarily reduce their communication security while implementing new systems, creating a window of vulnerability that enemy forces might exploit. What's the probability that the enemy intercept network can adapt to the new protocols before implementation is complete? Mica considered the question carefully, drawing on her analysis of the enemy system's capabilities and limitations. The analog base system will require manual analysis rather than automated processing. Conservative estimate is 6 to 8 hours before they can develop effective countermeasures. assuming they recognize the protocol change immediately. And if they don't recognize the change? Days or weeks, Mica replied with growing confidence. The modified analog systems won't generate the digital signatures their automated analysis depends upon. They'll need to completely reconfigure their intercept capabilities. Rodriguez made his decision with the authority of a career military professional facing tactical crisis. Transmit the emergency protocols to the destroyer squadron immediately. Authorize emergency implementation under combat conditions. As Mica began transmitting her improvised communication system to 3 ships facing potential submarine attack, she felt a profound shift in her professional identity. The quiet analyst who'd been mocked for seeing patterns others missed was now providing the tactical solution that could determine the outcome of a naval engagement. Around her, the communication center continued its crisis coordination, but the atmosphere had changed. Hammond stood silently at his workstation, no longer attempting to insert himself into technical discussions beyond his expertise. Walsh had retreated to routine monitoring duties, her earlier dismissal of Mica's competence now a professional liability rather than social currency. At 13:18 hours, the first confirmation arrived from USS Porter. Emergency communication protocols received and implementation in progress. Estimate 12 minutes to full operational capability. Rodriguez monitored the fleet coordination while Mica tracked the technical implementation of her emergency system. Each destroyer needed to manually reconfigure backup communication equipment while maintaining tactical awareness of submarine threats. A complex multitasking challenge that tested both technical competence and operational discipline. USS McCain confirms protocol implementation beginning, Davis reported. USS Fitzgerald requests clarification on frequency coordination procedures. Mica immediately began preparing detailed technical support for the implementation process. Drawing on her comprehensive understanding of both analog communication systems and modern tactical requirements. For the first time in her career, her obsessive attention to technical detail was being recognized as professional excellence rather than antisocial behavior. The transformation was more than personal vindication, it was proof that technical expertise, properly applied, could overcome both enemy threats and workplace discrimination. The quiet analyst who'd been systematically undermined for 4 years was now the communications center's most valuable asset in a crisis that could affect the balance of naval power in the Pacific. As she worked to ensure successful implementation of her emergency protocols, Mica understood that this moment would define not just her career, but her fundamental understanding of her own capabilities and value. The mockery and isolation she'd endured had nearly prevented her from recognizing and reporting the threat that was now being neutralized by her own technical solution. The enemy had underestimated the fleet's ability to adapt, just as her colleagues had underestimated her ability to provide critical analysis when it mattered most. In both cases, assumptions about predictable behavior were about to prove catastrophically wrong. At 13:25 hours, USS Porter transmitted the first message using Mica's emergency communication protocols. Analog systems operational. Initiating coordinated evasive maneuvers. Contact Alpha 7 appears to have lost tactical advantage. The message arrived as clear analog audio rather than encrypted digital text, but its implications were profound. For the first time since the crisis began, the destroyer squadron was communicating without providing real-time intelligence to enemy forces monitoring their every transmission. Rodriguez monitored the tactical coordination while Mica tracked the technical performance of her improvised system. The analog base provided security through obsolescence, while her digital encryption overlays ensured that even if the enemy detected the transmissions, decoding them would require manual cryptanalysis rather than automated processing. USS McCain confirmed successful protocol implementation, Davis reported from his monitoring station. They're requesting permission to begin coordinated submarine hunting operations using secure tactical coordination. The transformation was remarkable. Minutes earlier, the destroyer squadron had been operating with compromised communications while enemy submarines used their own transmissions against them. Now they possessed secure communication capabilities that their adversaries weren't prepared to counter. Hammond, relegated to monitoring standard traffic while Mica managed the crisis communications, made a desperate attempt to regain relevance. "Chief, we should verify that the analog systems are actually providing security, rather than just creating the illusion of protection." Mica responded without looking away from her monitoring displays, her voice carrying new authority. "Enemy intercept activity has decreased 73% since implementation began. The automated analysis systems can't process analog transmissions with the same efficiency as digital protocols." Her statement was supported by real-time data showing the enemy intercept network's confusion as it encountered communication systems it wasn't designed to analyze. The sophisticated intelligence operation that had threatened 3,000 American lives was being neutralized by deliberately primitive technology applied with modern cryptographic principles. At 13:31 hours, the tactical situation began shifting dramatically. USS Fitzgerald reported, "Contact Charlie 2 is attempting to disengage. Sonar signature suggests rapid depth change and course alteration." The enemy submarines, deprived of their intelligence advantage, were discovering that coordinated American naval operations presented significantly greater challenges than anticipated. Without real-time access to fleet communications, their pre-positioned tactical advantages were becoming liabilities as the destroyers coordinated hunting operations using secure analog channels. Rodriguez studied the tactical displays with growing satisfaction. "Johnson, your communication solution appears to have fundamentally altered the engagement dynamic. The enemy forces are reacting defensively rather than maintaining offensive positioning." Mica felt a surge of professional pride as she watched her technical solution affect the tactical balance of a naval engagement. The years of detailed study, obsessive analysis, and systematic understanding of communication protocols had culminated in a system that could protect American lives under combat conditions. USS McCain transmitted an update that confirmed the shifting tactical situation. "Contact Bravo 4 has exceeded torpedo launch range and continues to increase distance. Sonar analysis suggests emergency ballast procedures consistent with rapid evasion rather than tactical repositioning." The message revealed that enemy submarines were abandoning their coordinated attack posture in favor of individual survival, as they lost the intelligence advantage that had made their operation feasible. The sophisticated intercept network that had taken 10 days to position and calibrate was becoming useless against communication systems it couldn't efficiently analyze. Petty Officer Walsh, who had spent the morning dismissing Mica's capabilities, approached her workstation with obvious discomfort. "Johnson, I need technical guidance on monitoring the enemy intercept network while they attempt to adapt to the new protocols." The request represented a complete reversal of the morning's power dynamics. Walsh, who had publicly questioned Mica's competence and supported Hammond's dismissive assessment, was now seeking technical guidance from the analyst she'd helped marginalize for 4 years. Mica responded with professional courtesy that concealed the irony of the situation. "Monitor frequency bands 7 through 12 for increased signal processing activity. The enemy system will likely attempt pattern recognition on the analog transmissions, but the analysis will require significantly more time and computational resources." As she provided technical guidance to colleagues who had previously dismissed her expertise, Mica understood that the crisis had fundamentally altered the communication center's professional hierarchy. Technical competence was finally being recognized as more valuable than social manipulation or workplace politics. At 13:39 hours, a priority message arrived from Pacific Fleet Command. Submarine contacts in Grid 77 have ceased coordinated operations and are dispersing individually. Request confirmation that destroyer squadron communications have been secured. Rodriguez composed his response with evident satisfaction. Communication security restored using innovative analog-digital hybrid protocols, developed by Petty Officer Johnson. Enemy intercept capabilities have been effectively neutralized. The formal recognition of Mica's contribution represented more than professional acknowledgement. It was official validation that her technical expertise had provided the solution to a crisis that could have resulted in significant loss of American lives and naval assets. Hammond, watching his professional standing collapse in real time, made one final attempt to minimize Mica's achievement. "Chief, we should acknowledge that the analog solution is temporary. The enemy will eventually adapt their analysis capabilities to counter our new protocols, which is why Johnson is already developing the next generation of countermeasures," Rodriguez replied, effectively dismissing Hammond's pessimistic assessment, while emphasizing Mica's continued value to ongoing operations. Indeed, Mica was already working on adaptive encryption algorithms that could be rapidly reconfigured as enemy forces developed countermeasures to her current system. The technical challenge of staying ahead of sophisticated adversaries required exactly the kind of obsessive analytical focus that her colleagues had dismissed as antisocial behavior. USS Porter transmitted another tactical update. All three contacts have exceeded engagement range and appear to be withdrawing from the operational area. Request permission to resume scheduled anti-submarine warfare exercises using secure communication protocols. The message marked the effective end of the immediate crisis. Enemy submarines that had positioned themselves to exploit compromised American communications were retreating in the face of secure tactical coordination. They couldn't predict or counter. At 13:47 hours, Captain Morrison from Pacific Fleet Intelligence contacted Rodriguez directly. "Chief, your communication specialists' analysis and solution have been exceptional. We're requesting detailed technical reports for fleet-wide implementation of similar countermeasures." The call represented formal recognition from the highest levels of naval intelligence that Mica's work had strategic value beyond the immediate crisis. Her innovative approach to communication security was being considered for adoption across the entire Pacific Fleet. Rodriguez looked across the communication center toward Mica's workstation, where she was documenting her technical procedures for broader implementation. "Johnson, Pacific Fleet Intelligence is requesting comprehensive technical documentation of your emergency protocols for fleet-wide evaluation." The request meant that Mica's improvised solution to a tactical crisis might become standard procedure for protecting naval communications against sophisticated adversaries. The quiet analyst who had been mocked for her obsessive attention to technical detail was now being asked to develop security protocols for the entire Pacific Fleet. Hammond stood at his workstation in stunned silence, finally understanding the magnitude of his professional miscalculation. His confident dismissal of Mica's analytical capabilities had nearly prevented the discovery and solution of a threat that could have compromised American naval operations throughout the Pacific. Walsh approached Mica's workstation again, this time with genuine respect rather than condescending concern. "Johnson, I want to apologize for this morning. Your analysis was brilliant, and I should have supported your findings instead of questioning your judgment." The apology was sincere, representing recognition that workplace social dynamics had nearly prevented critical intelligence from reaching decision-makers during a time-sensitive crisis. The systematic undermining of Mica's credibility could have had catastrophic consequences if external events hadn't forced a reassessment of her technical competence. As the immediate crisis subsided, Mica reflected on the transformation of her professional identity over the course of a single morning. She had begun the day as the isolated analyst whose insights were routinely dismissed. and was ending it as the technical expert whose innovative solutions had protected American lives and naval assets from sophisticated enemy threats. The validation was profound, but more important was her own recognition that years of self-doubt had been unjustified. Her analytical capabilities, obsessive attention to technical detail, and ability to identify patterns others missed weren't professional liabilities. They were exactly the skills needed to protect American forces against increasingly sophisticated adversaries. The quiet nature that had made her a target for mockery had proven to be her greatest strength. When crisis demanded technical excellence over social conformity. At 14:15 hours, Admiral Patricia Sterling, commander of the Pacific Fleet, personally contacted the Naval Communications Center, Pearl Harbor. The secure video conference connection displayed her flag office aboard USS Blue Ridge, where strategic planning sessions were already incorporating lessons learned from the morning's crisis. "Chief Rodriguez," Admiral Sterling began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who commanded over 200,000 naval personnel across the Pacific. "I understand one of your analysts identified and neutralized a sophisticated intelligence threat against our destroyer operations." Rodriguez stood at attention despite the video connection. "Yes, ma'am." Petty Officer First Class Mica Johnson detected the enemy intercept network and developed countermeasures that successfully protected the squadron. "I want to speak with Petty Officer Johnson directly." The request sent a ripple of astonishment through the communications center. Admiral Sterling was legendary for her strategic acumen and demanding standards, and direct communication with enlisted personnel was reserved for exceptional circumstances. Mica felt her pulse quicken as Rodriguez gestured for her to join the video conference. "Petty Officer Johnson reporting, ma'am," Mica said, her voice steady despite the surreal nature of speaking directly with the Pacific Fleet's commanding officer. Admiral Sterling studied Mica through the video connection with the penetrating gaze of someone accustomed to evaluating personnel under pressure. "Johnson, your technical analysis this morning prevented what could have been a significant intelligence compromise and potential loss of American lives. I want you to understand that your work has strategic implications beyond today's tactical situation." "Thank you, ma'am," Mica replied, uncertain how to respond to praise from the highest levels of naval command. "More importantly," the Admiral continued, "your innovative approach to communication security represents exactly the kind of adaptive thinking we need to counter increasingly sophisticated adversaries. Pacific Fleet Intelligence is recommending you for immediate advancement and assignment to our new Emerging Threats Analysis Division." The announcement stunned everyone in the communications center. Assignment to Emerging Threats Analysis was typically reserved for officers with advanced degrees and years of specialized training, not enlisted analysts working routine signal processing duties. Hammond, who had spent 4 years undermining Mica's credibility, watched in disbelief as she received recognition from the highest levels of naval command. His confident dismissal of her analytical capabilities had not only been proven wrong, it had nearly prevented the discovery of intelligence that could have affected the strategic balance in the Pacific. Admiral Sterling addressed the broader implications of the morning's events. "The enemy operation you detected represents a new level of sophistication in intelligence warfare. Traditional communication security measures were insufficient against their capabilities, which means we need analysts who can think beyond conventional approaches." Mica found her voice as she grasped the strategic context of her work. "Ma'am, the enemy system was specifically designed to exploit predictable patterns in our digital communication protocols. Effective countermeasures will require adaptive systems that can rapidly evolve beyond their analytical capabilities." "Precisely," Admiral Sterling confirmed. "Which is why Pacific Fleet Intelligence wants you to lead development of next-generation communication security protocols." Your hybrid analog-digital approach this morning demonstrated exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need. The offer represented a complete transformation of Mica's career trajectory. She would be moving from isolated signal processing to strategic intelligence development, from being dismissed as an antisocial analyst to leading cutting-edge security research for the entire Pacific Fleet. Rodriguez, witnessing the recognition of an analyst he'd supervised for 4 years, felt profound satisfaction, mixed with professional concern about losing his most capable technical specialist. Admiral Johnson has been the cornerstone of our analytical capabilities here at Pearl Harbor, which is exactly why she needs to be working on fleet-wide security rather than routine signal processing. Admiral Sterling replied, "Chief, you've done exceptional work developing her capabilities, but the Pacific Fleet needs her expertise applied to strategic challenges." As the video conference concluded with Mica's formal assignment to emerging threats analysis, the communication center buzzed with astonished discussion. Colleagues who had witnessed her systematic marginalization over 4 years were struggling to process her sudden elevation to strategic importance. Petty Officer Davis approached her workstation with genuine admiration. "Johnson, I had no idea you were capable of that level of analysis. The way you identified that enemy network and developed countermeasures under pressure was incredible." The comment highlighted a painful reality. Her colleagues had never bothered to understand her capabilities because Hammond's campaign of professional sabotage had convinced them she was an ineffective analyst whose insights could be safely ignored. Walsh, who had publicly questioned Mica's competence that morning, stood nearby with obvious discomfort. "Mica, I owe you more than an apology. I actively undermined your credibility because I listened to gossip rather than evaluating your work objectively." The admission was significant because it acknowledged that workplace social dynamics had created an environment where exceptional analytical capabilities were dismissed as antisocial obsession. Walsh's participation in marginalizing Mica had nearly prevented critical intelligence from reaching decision-makers. During a time-sensitive crisis. Hammond remained silent at his workstation, finally understanding that his 4-year campaign to undermine Mica's professional standing had been based on his own insecurity, rather than objective assessment of her capabilities. His confident dismissal of her technical expertise had nearly resulted in catastrophic consequences for American naval operations. At 14:45 hours, Captain Morrison from Pacific Fleet Intelligence arrived at the communication center to personally brief Mica on her new assignment. His presence emphasized the strategic importance placed on her analytical capabilities and innovative approach to technical challenges. "Johnson," Captain Morrison began, "your work this morning represents a paradigm shift in how we approach communication security. The enemy operation you detected was specifically designed to exploit weaknesses in conventional digital systems, but your analog hybrid solution created security through unpredictability rather than encryption complexity." Mica absorbed the strategic implications of her technical innovation. "Sir, the principle could be applied broadly using deliberately obsolete or unconventional approaches to create security advantages against adversaries who've adapted to standard protocols." "Exactly," Morrison confirmed. "That's why Admiral Sterling wants you leading a team of specialists, developing adaptive countermeasures for the entire Pacific Fleet. Your assignment begins immediately with priority access to classified intelligence on emerging communication threats." The transformation was overwhelming. Mica had spent 4 years in professional isolation, her insights dismissed and her capabilities questioned, only to discover that her analytical approach was exactly what the Navy needed to counter sophisticated adversaries. Rodriguez, preparing for Mica's departure, reflected on the morning's events with mixed emotions. "Johnson, I should have recognized your exceptional capabilities years ago. The way you were treated here was unprofessional and counterproductive." His admission represented institutional recognition that talent development had been compromised by social dynamics that prioritized conformity over competence. Mica's isolation hadn't been the result of inadequate social skills. It had been the consequence of systematic discrimination against analytical thinking that challenged conventional approaches. "Chief," Mica replied with characteristic directness, "the isolation actually helped me develop unconventional analytical techniques. If I'd been more socially integrated, I might have adopted standard approaches that wouldn't have detected this morning's threat." The observation contained profound implications for how the military identified and developed analytical talent. Conventional team building and social integration, while valuable for most military functions, could actually inhibit the kind of independent thinking needed for strategic intelligence analysis. Captain Morrison nodded in agreement. "Johnson's point is well taken. Emerging threats analysis specifically recruits analysts who think differently from conventional approaches. We need people who see patterns others miss and develop solutions others haven't considered." As Mica prepared to leave Pearl Harbor for her new assignment, she reflected on the morning's extraordinary transformation. She had begun the day as the quiet analyst whose insights were routinely dismissed, endured public humiliation from colleagues who questioned her competence, and was ending it with recognition from the highest levels of naval command. The validation was profound, but more important was her own understanding that years of self-doubt had been unjustified. Her analytical capabilities, attention to technical detail, and ability to identify subtle patterns weren't professional liabilities. They were exactly the skills needed to protect American forces against increasingly sophisticated threats. Hammond, watching Mica receive recognition he'd never achieved despite years of self-promotion, finally understood the magnitude of his professional misjudgment. His confident dismissal of her capabilities had nearly prevented the discovery and solution of a threat that could have compromised naval operations throughout the Pacific. The quiet analyst who had been mocked for her antisocial tendencies was departing to lead strategic intelligence development for the entire Pacific Fleet, while the colleagues who had marginalized her remained in routine positions, processing standard communications traffic. As she packed her personal items for transfer to her new assignment, Mica understood that the morning's crisis had revealed not just enemy capabilities, but fundamental truths about talent recognition, professional competence, and the dangers of allowing social dynamics to override technical expertise when national security was at stake. 6 months later, Lieutenant Mica Johnson stood before a classified briefing room at Pacific Fleet Intelligence Headquarters in San Diego, addressing an audience of senior officers and intelligence specialists from across the Pacific Theater. The presentation screen behind her displayed a comprehensive analysis of enemy communication intercept capabilities that had been neutralized using adaptive security protocols she'd developed. The hybrid analog-digital communication system implemented during the Marshall Islands incident has been successfully deployed fleet-wide, she reported to the assembled commanders. Enemy intercept capabilities have decreased by 87% across all Pacific operations, with no successful communication compromises recorded in the past 4 months. Admiral Sterling, seated in the front row, nodded with evident satisfaction. The innovative thinking that had saved 3 destroyers from potential submarine attack had evolved into a comprehensive communication security revolution that was reshaping naval operations throughout the Pacific. Captain Morrison, now serving as Mica's direct supervisor in emerging threats analysis, provided strategic context. Lieutenant Johnson's adaptive security protocols have been adopted by NATO allies and are being implemented across all American naval operations globally. Her approach represents a fundamental shift from reactive security measures to proactive unpredictability. The transformation was remarkable. The quiet analyst who had been dismissed as antisocial and obsessive had become the Navy's leading expert on adaptive communication security, with her innovations protecting naval operations from the Pacific to the Mediterranean. But the most significant changes had occurred not just in technology, but in how the Navy identified and developed analytical talent. The morning's events at Pearl Harbor had triggered a comprehensive review of personnel evaluation practices that revealed systematic problems in recognizing unconventional thinking. Dr. Sarah Chun, a civilian specialist in organizational psychology, who had been brought in to study the incident, presented her findings to the intelligence briefing. The Pearl Harbor case study revealed that social conformity pressures were systematically suppressing exactly the kind of innovative thinking needed for strategic intelligence analysis. Her research had documented how workplace dynamics, particularly the marginalization of introverted analysts who thought differently from established norms, were creating blind spots in threat detection and solution development. The study had become required reading at the Naval Academy and was influencing personnel policies across all military services. Lieutenant Johnson's case demonstrates that exceptional analytical capabilities can be misinterpreted as antisocial behavior when evaluation criteria prioritize social integration over technical competence. Dr. Chun continued. The near miss at Pearl Harbor could have been prevented if institutional culture had better supported unconventional analytical approaches. The implications extended far beyond individual personnel decisions. Military effectiveness in an era of sophisticated adversaries required exactly the kind of pattern recognition and adaptive thinking that conventional evaluation systems often discouraged or overlooked. Admiral Sterling addressed the broader strategic lessons. The enemy operation at Marshall Islands succeeded initially because they correctly assessed our predictable communication patterns and standard security measures. They failed ultimately because we adapted beyond their analytical capabilities faster than they could counter our innovations. The strategic principle had become central to Pacific Fleet doctrine, maintaining tactical advantage through unpredictability rather than just technological superiority. Enemy forces could develop countermeasures to known systems and procedures, but they struggled to anticipate innovative approaches that departed from established patterns. Back at Pearl Harbor, the Naval Communications Center had undergone significant changes in both technology and culture. Chief Rodriguez, now wearing the additional stripes of senior chief, had implemented new evaluation criteria that specifically valued analytical innovation over social conformity. Derek Hammond had requested transfer to a supply depot in San Diego, unable to reconcile his professional identity with the reality that his confident assessments had been catastrophically wrong. His departure had eliminated the social dynamics that had systematically undermined analytical excellence in favor of workplace politics. Jennifer Walsh had evolved into a competent signals analyst who now actively supported colleagues whose analytical approaches differed from conventional norms. Her participation in marginalizing Mica had taught her valuable lessons about the dangers of prioritizing social dynamics over technical competence. The Communications Center's new culture explicitly valued diverse analytical approaches, with introverted specialists like Mica being recognized as essential assets rather than social problems requiring correction. The change had attracted exceptional talent who had previously avoided military service due to concerns about cultural conformity pressures. Petty Officer Maria Santos, a brilliant cryptographer who had joined the center 3 months after Mica's departure, represented the new type of analyst being recruited and developed. Her innovative work on quantum-resistant encryption was already generating interest from the highest levels of naval intelligence. Johnson's legacy here isn't just the technical innovations, Chief Rodriguez explained to visiting officers studying the Pearl Harbor incident. It's the cultural transformation that allows us to identify and develop exceptional analytical talent, regardless of social presentation or conventional behavior patterns. The center had become a model for talent development across the Pacific Fleet, with its personnel evaluation methods being studied and replicated at intelligence facilities throughout the military. The systematic marginalization that had nearly prevented critical threat detection was being replaced by institutional support for diverse analytical approaches. Meanwhile, at Pacific Fleet Intelligence Headquarters, Mica's team of specialists was developing next-generation countermeasures against increasingly sophisticated adversaries. Her experience with marginalization and isolation had made her particularly effective at identifying and supporting unconventional thinkers who might otherwise be overlooked by traditional evaluation systems. Lieutenant Commander David Park, a former nuclear engineer whose analytical approach had been considered too theoretical for practical application, was now leading development of quantum communication security under Mica's supervision. His work represented exactly the kind of innovative thinking that conventional military culture often discouraged. The key insight from the Marshall Islands incident, Park explained during a technical briefing, is that security through unpredictability can be more effective than security through complexity. Enemy analytical systems are optimized for standard approaches, not adaptive innovations. The principle was being applied beyond communication security to strategic planning, tactical coordination, and intelligence analysis. Military effectiveness against sophisticated adversaries required the ability to think beyond established patterns and develop solutions that couldn't be easily anticipated or countered. Dr. Chun's continuing research had identified similar patterns across military history, where exceptional strategic innovations had often originated from individuals whose thinking styles were initially dismissed as impractical or antisocial. The study was influencing military education and personnel development policies at the highest levels. The challenge for military institutions, Dr. Chun observed, is maintaining operational discipline while supporting the kind of unconventional thinking needed for strategic innovation. The Pearl Harbor case study provides a model for achieving both objectives simultaneously. Admiral Sterling, reflecting on the strategic implications during a command briefing, articulated the broader lessons. Our adversaries assume they can predict our responses based on standard military doctrine and established procedures. Our tactical advantage comes from maintaining the capability to adapt beyond their analytical predictions. The approach had already proven effective in multiple operational contexts, with enemy intelligence operations repeatedly frustrated by American communication security measures that evolved faster than countermeasures could be developed. The adaptive unpredictability that Mica had pioneered was becoming a fundamental element of American naval strategy. 5 years after the Marshall Islands incident, Mica received the Navy Commendation Medal for her innovative contributions to communication security and strategic intelligence analysis. The ceremony at Pacific Fleet Headquarters was attended by officers whose careers had been influenced by her work and the cultural changes it had initiated. Admiral Sterling, now serving as Chief of Naval Operations, presented the award with remarks that emphasized the broader significance of Mica's contributions. Lieutenant Commander Johnson's work represents more than technical innovation. It demonstrates the strategic value of supporting diverse analytical approaches and unconventional thinking in military operations. The quiet analyst who had been mocked for her antisocial nature had become a lieutenant commander whose innovations were protecting naval operations globally and whose analytical approach was influencing military culture at the institutional level. Her experience had proven that exceptional capabilities could emerge from unexpected sources when institutions created environments that valued competence over conformity. The legacy of that humid Tuesday morning at Pearl Harbor continued to influence how the Navy identified talent, developed innovative solutions, and adapted to sophisticated adversaries. The mockery and marginalization that had nearly prevented critical threat detection had been replaced by institutional recognition that the most important analytical capabilities often emerged from individuals who thought differently from established norms. Mica's journey from dismissed analyst to strategic innovator had demonstrated that true strength often lay hidden beneath quiet surfaces, waiting for the right moment to emerge and change everything. The quiet nature that had made her a target for ridicule had proven to be exactly what the Navy needed when conventional approaches were insufficient to protect American lives and interests. In a world of increasingly sophisticated threats, ability to think beyond predictable patterns had become not just valuable, but essential for survival and success. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.